Up for June 30th, the 6th Sunday after Pentecost. And so that's Sundays after the event of Pentecost, 50 days after Easter. And we have our lessons for today of Lamentations chapter 3, 2 Corinthians 8 with a section torn out, and Mark chapter 5. Now, just a little bit of insight on the lectionary is sometimes they take something out because it kind of would distract you from the theme of the day. So one of the things that I like to do is and I know some other pastors and so forth like to do is they like to figure out, well, what was that distracting thing from St. Paul's argument as he goes through 2 Corinthians 8 that might not have significance in correlation with Mark chapter 5 and Lamentations chapter 3. So we'll look at that as well. But for now, we're going to kind of just start with the Old Testament and run through the New Testament. And again, we are live on Kick on Sunday afternoons. You can join us there, and you can leave your comments live, and I will answer them. If you have any questions on YouTube when this is uploaded later, please just drop a comment below, and I will make either a special video or I will answer it next Sunday as we get things started. But let's start off with Lamentations chapter 3. Lamentations is written by Jeremiah during or following the destruction of Jerusalem in, I believe, 570 BC. Okay. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His miracles never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for the man to bear the yoke of his youth. Let him sit alone in silence when it is laid on him. Let him put his mouth in the dust. There may yet be hope. Let him give his cheek to the one who strikes. Let him be filled with insults. For the Lord will not cast off forever, but though he cause grief, he will have compassion. According to the abundance of his steadfast love, for he does not afflict from his heart or grieve the children of men. Right? So this is about his lament, right? And he's reminding himself that the Lord is steadfast, the Lord renews, the Lord is our hope, because again, the return from exile, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the hope for the return from exile. Then the Lord is good to those who wait for him. This is about patience in that time. This is about enduring through that time. This is about, is it good for a man that he bear? It is good for a man that he bear the yoke of his youth, which is basically the idea of, as we grow old, right, we have to carry with us our hardships, our shames, our difficulties, all the things that we did in childhood. We have to carry the consequences with us. And so that means that if my bad knees are due to the fact that I played football in high school or whatever, then that's what I have to deal with. If I have, bad thoughts or bad memory because of drugs that I took, or whether I have, again, bad eyesight because of, staring into the sun too much, or whether I have bad ears because of the loud music that I listen to, whatever it may be, the consequences of our youth we bear. But as we bear them, and this part is kind of the more, I'm not quite sure part in this section. Because let him sit alone in silence when it is laid on him, right? I think that's going more so on the lines of don't grumble and complain about the consequences of your own actions, right? Rather than get away from me, get alone, remain isolated and shut up and stay quiet, right? Do as you're told, get out of here, right? I don't think that's the case as much as it is more that when those burdens are laid upon you, don't grumble about it because you're getting what was your due. You're getting your comeuppance, right? Whatever you did in the past that was bad and you're receiving those consequences, don't say, well, somebody else didn't receive their consequences, or, but this other person, just take it as it is and let him put his mouth in the dust. There may yet be hope, right? And that's the mouth in the dust is prostrating yourself, right? If you put your mouth in the soil, right? That's you putting your head to the ground, right? And that is bowing. That is prostrating yourself in the hopes of hope, right? This is not the appeal to, well, everybody else gets treated differently than I do, right? This is begging, humbling yourself to be said, while I deserve this, I pray for mercy. I pray for pity, right? And if they strike the one cheek, right, offer them the other. Let him give his cheek to the one who strikes, right? Just offer it up. And similarly, if they're going to insult you, just bring it on. You can say anything you want. I really had a philosophy, and it was probably not the best philosophy at the time, but it was one of the ways in which I dealt with bullies in the past is the fact that I always told myself, I know how to insult myself more than you do. So if you're going to try and insult me, I'm going to come out with an insult against myself that's worse than that. Because I know the things that I have wrong. And I'm not grumbling about it or complaining about it. Now, there's a problem psychologically where that runs yourself down, that can lead to kind of states of depression or stuff like that, or can really tend towards anxiety and stresses, and realistically depression, because you can literally run yourself down worse than anybody else. You have that capability to destroy or insult you because you know your flaws and you know the flaws that are most poignant to you. And that's where I think probably one of the benefits that I did was I used their insults and made them worse, which is basically a way of exaggeration. And I think that's how I emotionally dealt with it, because I never really got depressed over it or anxious over it. It was more my way of turning their insults into better jokes. Not suggesting that psychologically as a way of doing this, but it's an interesting part of me, of who I am, that if you want to insult me, I can take a lot of good insults, and similarly I can throw back some insults, but I think I don't know, most of the insults that I feel like I generally throw back are, again, insults that you've either told me about yourself or, yeah, I probably do still have some zingers in there, but I don't know if I've changed that much. Probably should. The Lord will not cast off forever, right? And so then this is the hope, right? The mercy of the laying down of the mouth and the dust, the pity, right? All of that stuff is an appeal for mercy. And so the idea is that the Lord will have mercy. Though he cause grief, he will have compassion, right? According to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not afflict from his heart or grieve the children of men. And this is important in understanding the idea is that God punishes sin. God doesn't do it out of love to do punishment. God punishes sin so that we as humans, we as stubborn individuals, would recognize what sin is. We have a huge problem in understanding what is truly sinful and what is not sinful. And if you want examples from the culture of today, you don't have to go very far to find them. But that's the point. The point is that there are sins in the world, and we commit them. And therefore, we have to bear the consequences of them. And we should humbly admit that we're poor, miserable sinners, and we deserve nothing more than what we get. Well, actually, we deserve a lot more than what we actually receive for those sins. But his steadfast love will have compassion on us. He will not cast us off forever, right? He may put us into exile for a time. He may destroy the temple in Jerusalem, but it will be rebuilt. He may send us off to a place where we're persecuted and martyred, but we will be rebuilt, right? And that's the focus. The focus of this ultimately for Jeremiah and for the people is to recognize that the reason why Jerusalem was destroyed is because of their own sinfulness. And the reason why they're going to come back and rebuild that temple is because of the gracious love of God. And don't think that God, out of his heart, out of his love, maybe that's not a right way to say that, is hurting you. He is hurting you, and I'm more than willing to say that God grieves us or God afflicts us because he does it out of justice. But he doesn't do it fully because the full punishment of us comes to Christ. Christ is the one who takes our ultimate punishment on himself on the cross. But that doesn't mean we avoid affliction or harm or devastation. And that doesn't come out of his heart, but that comes out of his justice. Other people will talk about the wrath of God is like the alien work of God. His main work is love, compassion, creation, redemption, comfort, salvation, right? Those things. His alien work is judgment, destruction, wrath, affliction, death, right? They're consequences of his justice. That God is just. And as a just God, that means he has to do just things. And that's what he does. He does just things. So, all right. So that's kind of the Old Testament lesson that brings us to a point of thinking about hope. Hope in the midst of affliction. Hope in the midst of after some sort of devastating or disaster thing happens. And so let's move on to 2 Corinthians and see what that has to deal with hope or endurance in times of affliction. 2 Corinthians 8, and we are actually just going to go straight to the text here. We're going to bump that up just a little bit more. I'm going to scroll that down so we get that first part. So this is the actual ESV text. And I don't know who else is watching this, but if you prefer a different translation, I can work with different translations. I know the lectionary I have is in ESV, but I guess I could probably work with other translations if you prefer them. But ESV is my main translation, unless you want me to go to the Hebrew and the Greek, in which case that's going to take too long. All right. 2 Corinthians 8. We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, all right, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. And these are the saints in Jerusalem in particular. And this not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. Accordingly, we urged Titus that as he had started, so he should complete among you this act of grace. All right. But as you excel in everything, in faith, speech, knowledge, in all earnestness, and in love for you, in our love for you, see, there's a footnote here, in your love for us. Yeah, that's another way of mixing up the words. In our love for you, see that you excel in this act of grace also. I say this not as a command, but to improve by earnestness of others that your love also is genuine. Okay? For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. Okay, now this, verse 10, this is the section that's cut off. And in this matter I give my judgment. Right, so you may understand why this is cut off. This benefits you, who a year ago started not only to do this work, but also to desire to do it. So now finishing doing it as well, so that your readiness in desiring it may be matched by your completing it out of what you have. For if the readiness is there, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. For I do not mean that others should be eased. So this is then where it picks back up. So you can see how this section here, right? I give my judgment. This benefits you, your readiness. And if the readiness is there, it is acceptable according to it a person has, right? So this is all about your giving and your ability to give and pursuing giving, right? And then we get verse 13, and we're going to have a conversation here. There we go. For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but that as a matter of fairness, your abundance at the present time should supply their need, so that their abundance may supply your need, and that there may be fairness. As it is written, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. So that's one of the things here, is the fact that you have this section, which kind of goes back to the gifts and donations and stuff. So maybe it fits there, but this needs to be explained. And I didn't explain this morning. I thought about it after church this morning, is the fact of how much people may hear that today's society and see things differently. But the main earnestness or the main focus of the first part is, hey, brothers, right? We want you to know about the grace of God that's been among the Macedonians, right? These people that are kind of north, east of them, right? How they, in their poverty, in their affliction, in their time of testing, have given generously to help the saints and help the relief of the poor, right? They've given greatly out of their own poverty, right? And they've given in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in earnestness, in love, right? So the idea is that then look at you guys, right? We urge Titus that as he had started, right? Titus had already started this project, so he should complete it among you, this act of grace, right? But as you excel in everything, in faith, speech, knowledge, earnestness, love towards us or love towards yourself or our love, see that you excel in this act of grace as well, right? As you continue to try and live out the Christian life, try and live out the Christian life in giving of alms or giving of charity, right? Looking out for the poor, looking out for the needy. Because just as, and this is where this goes into the grace of God, because Jesus Christ, who was rich beyond belief, humbled himself to become a servant, humbled himself, impoverished himself, so that he could give you the richness of eternal life. Not monetary richness, right? The richness of eternal life. So if you have monetary richness, you can share that with those that don't have monetary richness. If you have richness of spirit, you can share those with those who need strengthening in the faith, right? It's about giving, but it's so often, again, we as a church recognize that we need funding. And there's a huge balance between my congregation needs funding and the mission of the gospel needs funding. Those are two distinct, different views, right? They can go hand in hand. But if my focus is purely on the fact that, well, our congregation needs to make budget so that our congregation remains open, that's not good. And similarly, if I say, well, it doesn't matter whether our congregation remains open, all that matters is we get the word of God out into as many hands and hearts and minds as we can. Well, but if your church isn't there for them, right, then they got to either start their own church, which could be a hardship, or they don't get connected with a community and therefore they fall away. So you need the community of believers to be able to support the community of believers, and you need the community of the believers to help to support or gather in new believers. But at the same time, this goes into then the last part, which really becomes difficult. Because reading the last part at face value, right, just reading it, for I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, right? No. I don't mean that somebody else should sit in a lap of luxury while you bear the burden of all the work to pay for them. That's not fair. But as a matter of fairness, right, if they have needs that are not being met, but are working, right? if they are working diligently and their needs are not being met for whatever reason, right, then part of your job as a fellow Christian is to help them, to help to supply their needs, so that even in their situation, when they then have an abundance and you have the need, that they would then give back to you. There's a song, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton? Is it Alexander Hamilton? I'm going to totally cheat on this, and I'm not going to do this because YouTube stuff. Alexander... My library. It's called Alexander by Lost and Found. I think I'm going to have to look this up. Come on. Stupid chair. I believe it's Alexander Westing book of 8 Marmalade Lane. But it's the song by Lost and Found. Where the heck? Someone colored in my book. Alexander Wesley Folk of 8 Marmalade Lane never had a penny to his name, but Alexander Westing Folk of 8 Marmalade Lane really knew how to play the poor man's game. So the idea is that he depended on his friends and his friends depended on him, and everyone had a little bit because everybody chipped in. And because everybody chipped in, that meant that everybody had enough. And so it's like the main story of like Stone Soup, where the guy goes around to everybody in town and asks them if they have a little bit of food, or asks them for a little bit of food. And so then he goes to the edge of town and he sits down with a pot, throws a stone in the pot and water in the pot, and boils the water. Well, and then people come up to him and they're just like, well, what are you doing? And the one guy, he says, I'm making stone soup. And so then he takes, he tastes it and says, you know what? I don't know, but this soup could use something. And so then the one guy says, well, I have some carrots. And another guy says, I have some potatoes. And so they cut up the carrots and cut up the potatoes and cut up this little bit of this and a little bit of that. And eventually they throw it all in the stew. And the idea is, or not stew, soup. And then when they ate it, right, they had a really nice big pot of soup. And everybody was able to eat because everybody put their just a little bit in. And so everybody was able to meet their needs. Now, Alexander Westing Folk of 8 Marmalade Lane wore a crooked hat and worn out pairs of shoes. That's not the part that I want. But, oh man, where's the... So the idea is that he comes into money, right? He gets money somewhere in here. Everyone had a little bit because everyone chipped in. Alexander Westing Lane, part 4. Alexander Westing Folk, Marmalade Lane. He had a crooked hat, wore shoes, singing. The blues. See, I think it skips part of this. Yeah, he woke to find a fortune had been left in his name. And as he woke to find this fortune, he went and then he bought a house and he did these things. And then his friends came knocking at the door and said, hey, Alexander, you got something to spare. Why are you going to let your friends fall? And Alexander just laughed And then a dragon comes to his door, and the dragon just says, oh. And the idea is that the dragon basically makes everything Alexander now has go up in smoke, because he'd been given all this stuff, basically because everybody was sharing this. Everybody had a little bit, and everybody chipped in, and that meant that everybody was helping to take care of one another. So nobody needed a lot. Nobody needed to have an exorbitant amount. And this is a part of the philosophy that goes into things like socialism and Marxism and stuff like that. The problem is that the idea behind this is that everybody's needs are met and that everybody's chipping in. If everybody's chipping in to make productivity and everybody's getting their needs met, and there's extra because certain people are working harder or certain people are making more production or more value, and so therefore getting more value out, right? Even in Alexander's case, the problem is not that he went and bought himself a house and all this stuff. The problem is that he let his fellow friends fall, right? The problem is that he sees the need in the world and he doesn't help it. And he shouldn't be forced to help it. That's a totally different thing, because that's not what the message of the scripture is about. It's about the grace of God, which is the gift of God, the love of God, right? So it's not about forcing someone into a Marxist socialist type scenario as much as living in a capitalistic world where you have Christians that set up orphanages, Christians that set up hospitals, Christians that set up care units and feeding the poor and food kitchens and stuff like that, where Christians are doing that out of love of neighbor, right? And if they want to set up barriers to entrance, simple barriers of entrance, like, if we give you this, then you got to give us something in return. You can't, it's kind of the idea of the soup kitchen or the halfway house for homeless people, where you got to help out the house. You got to help to take care of the house. You got to do something here that helps to support the needs that you're receiving, right? And so they have places for homeless people where they put them to work in gardens, right? And then they eat part of the produce that's, that goes into the part of their food bill because they work to make that happen, right? Or they can develop their own little businesses, or they can develop their own ingenuity out of that, right? To hopefully help them to be able to support themselves and not live in that place. And hopefully then later help to give back to a place like that. So that's the methodology that Paul is getting at, right? We don't want you to be burdened, and we don't want you to just give because you should give to us, and you should do for us. But we want you to give because you want to give. We want you to be fair and feel fair about it. And similarly, we want to be able to support you if you're in need. And this even goes back to another thing that I've talked about probably in the last month or so, is trying to emphasize the fact that we don't always know what our people's needs are, right? So often you wish you had a magic wand to just go, what's Bob's needs? Okay, we need to help Bob to wear better shoes, or, what's Sandy's needs? Oh, her needs are her mortgage payments are too high and she's probably living in a house that she can't afford. Or what's Sandra's needs? And Sandra's needs are the fact that she really just needs somebody to talk to on occasions. And you know what? If we went and we connected Sandra, and I can't even remember what the other name I made up was, maybe, Sandra would be able to financially help to make sure that she could live in her house, and if she visited her, and help to support her that way, so we could connect things. And all that stuff takes time, effort, and is a challenge for the church. But the church can't do any of it unless they know the needs of the people and they know the people that have the means to help the needs. Right? And that's always kind of the biggest complexity with things. There's so many things that I love in the world, and there's so many things that I despise that are the same thing. Because whether it's food banks or food pantries, or whether it's even walk-in clinics and stuff like that, some of that stuff can be done really well, and some of that stuff can be done just horribly awful. But that's really the idea that Paul is trying to get at. We need places that people can go when they're in need and receive what they need. But at the same time, we don't want it to be a burden on those that are supplying the need. And we don't want it to make life so easy for those that have the need that they don't feel encouraged to go out and be better or get better. Right? That's the problem with a social welfare system. That's why it shouldn't be a part of the system. It should be a side thing that's done locally and by local charitable organizations, and not something that's organized by the government, not something that's organized by the state, not something that's even, and realistically, I don't even think it should be federally organized or a national business, right? So often those things, they bog everything down with so much minutia versus just local community. Hey, I'm collecting money for our local charity organization that helps out with the poor people in our area. We only deal with people in our area, so whatever you can give to help them in your area, and then maybe even you can ask for money from elsewhere, but it's really should be a small program so you know where all the money is going and all the support is going. So, all right, back to the gospel lesson. As if we haven't spent enough time on this video already, we do have a long gospel lesson from Mark chapter 5 about, again, being faithful and remaining faithful through hard times. Mark chapter 5, we have, let me scroll that down. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. So this crossing of the boat again has a connection to the last couple of weeks. You'll remember that I think it was last week we had the calming of the storm. And so before that, he went and he gathered with his disciples. They told him parables. He got into a boat. He crossed over the other side. First part of chapter 5, they go to the Gerasenes and they meet up with a guy that's demon possessed that lives in a cemetery. I don't know what that's like. And then he casts out the legion, the demon, and sends it into pigs. They run down the side, and then they go and they get all the town people. They're upset with him, so then they get in the boat, and now they're crossing to another side, to another location. So they're crossing the Sea of Galilee again. And then when they get to the sea, a ruler of the synagogue named Jairus by name, seeing him, he fell at his feet, right? He put his face, mouth to the dust and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." Little daughter, right? Significance there. But this is one of the things of the story that we don't often get in the other gospel accounts as we do the other gospel accounts, because the little daughter, when you read down at the bottom, she's 12 years of age. So she's a 12-year-old, but she's still a little daughter. So, and we want to emphasize that not just because we live in an American culture and we recognize what the age of 18 means of adulthood, because I don't necessarily agree with that in certain contexts. But the point is that this is a little daughter, but this isn't an infant child. This isn't his infant. All right, and so Jesus goes with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him, right? Thronged, gathered in close. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all she had. So this is a part of the connection with the spending of all she has, giving up of all her needs or of all her resources, right? She spent everything. And was not better, but rather getting worse. She had heard reports about Jesus, probably reports about Jesus' healings, came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garment, I will be made well. I will be healed. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt she felt inside of her body being made well, healed of her disease. Now note, power goes out from Jesus, and Jesus, perceiving himself the power had gone out from him, did this miracle, right? Miracle already performed. But yet Jesus stops then and makes sure that the crowd recognizes the miracle. Jesus stops, immediately turns about, and he says, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?' What kind of joke is this?" And he looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, she recognized immediately that the blood had dried up. She was healed. So what does she do? In fear and trembling, she falls down, puts her mouth in the dust, and told him the whole truth, told him everything. And he says to her, "Daughter, little girl, little daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your diseases." This, again, is one of those passages that I think it's so important to be able to go to the original text, and we are chapter 5, verse 34. Go to the original and recognize, and he said to her, daughter being connected with above, right? Woman bleeding for 12 years, so it's the little daughter, save and live. Okay. Daughter, your faith has saved you, salvificked you, saved you. Go in peace, or with peace, and this should have to deal with to be, and that you may be, continue to be healthy healthy from your diseases, right? And this is torment or suffering. But there is something important there to recognize the salvation aspect, that your faith has saved you and that you should be healthy, right? Or made whole, even. And then later on, because I have this pulled up already, right, when he says to, for she was 12 years old, but he says Talitha cum, or Talitha kumi, right? Kum is the Hebrew word for rise. Kumi, I say arise. Talitha is little girl, which means menumenon, which is interpreted koration, little girl, I say to you, egaira, resurrect, rise up. And she, anastasis, resurrection. Anastasia, right, means resurrection. That's why it's, I don't know, I get fascinated by the idea of Anastasia, the living Russian daughter or whatever, being named for resurrection. But never mind. All side notes. But here, the daughter, your faith has made you well. The daughter connects her with the daughter of the ruler. The faith has made you well is going to connect it to the do not fear, only believe. Go in peace, healed of your disease, the disease that led to death, healing of death, making alive from death. Right? All of this is resurrection image right here in the healing of the woman. So you don't need the other count, but it's sandwiched in because it's not just a resurrection for a child to be restored to their family, but it's a resurrection of a woman being restored to life who has spent 12 years, the same amount of time that the child was alive, she spent in isolation or basically under physician's care, so trying to get herself better and only getting worse. You can spend your entire life in this world trying to make yourself a better person or a perfect person or whatever you want to do, but you can't do it. It is only by faith that you are going to be saved. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't do good works. It means that your good works don't save you. And that's one of the other things about this passage. There's two reasons I feel, why does Jesus say, who touched my garments? The first reason is to reveal that a miracle actually took place to the crowd, because nobody else was aware of it. Only Jesus was. The second thing is to make sure that she knows that it's not the act of touching the garment that saved her or gave her the relief or made the miracle happen. It is the faith that she had that made the miracle happen. The faith makes the miracle happen, not the action making the faith happen. Right? So the act of baptism is done in faith, is done to create faith, but it is done in faith and by faith. So, I mean, there's such a complexity here, but it still comes down to faith first. By faith alone, we're saved. Obviously, by grace alone, we're saved through faith, but overhearing that the daughter's dead, so I'll move ahead. So while they were still speaking, someone came to the ruler and said, your daughter's dead, don't trouble the teacher any further. And overhearing this, Jesus says to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. And he allowed no one to follow him except for Peter, James, and John, so the three major apostles. They come to the house of the ruler, and I like this. He sees a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly, because these are professional mourners that are brought in when someone's dying or when someone's dead. And when he had entered, he said to them, and I don't know why I'd never heard it like this before. Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. There's a rhythm to that, even in the English. I don't know that it's really there in the Greek, but why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. Right there, there's a rhythm there. And I guess I never picked up on it. But one of the things about the commotion and the people weeping and wailing is that they would have been also playing dirges and music, right? So it wouldn't have just been, oh dear, moan. And yeah, I wave my hands in the air like a Muppet. But it wouldn't have just been that. They would have actually been singing sorrowful tunes. You know, I'm sure we all have kind of those songs that we listen to, or music that we listen to when we're kind of struggling or down and out, or kind of when we're in the either thinking about mourning or mourning over someone's death or passing. You know, you kind of, and maybe you have upbeat songs that you listen to instead of things that just help you think about death and thinking about kind of coming to the end, and, you know, like, oh, Danny boy, right? But there's music that comes to it. And to think that even in this translation, they actually put in something that had a rhythm to it. Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. Right? There's a rhythm there. Maybe you're not hearing it. Maybe I'm horrible. But nevertheless, he goes in, he takes the father and the mother there, he grabs her by the hand, he says, Talitha Kumi, which means little girl arise. Little girl, I say to you, arise, which is really not good, because what it means is, little girl, arise, right? It's not, little girl, I say to you, arise. You don't say it in the Michael Jackson voice. You kind of say it in that deep, directive, ordering voice, right? It's little girl, arise, get up, right? And it's almost to that same extent, you know, like, I don't know if you've ever worked with one of those like Alice dummies or whatever, when you're doing CPR training, but it's kind of more along those lines. Like, he grabs her gently by the hand and says, wake up! And immediately the girl got up, began walking, right? Because she was 12 years old. So it's not the little girl that can't walk, right? It's a little girl. I mean, she just goes back to her daily activity. And they were immediately overcome with amazement, because what the heck just happened? And he strictly charged them to tell no one. And of course we know, because they told everybody. And he told her to give her something to eat, right? Feed her, because she's not a spirit. She's not a ghost. She's not a zombie. She's a little girl. She is exactly what she was created to be. Oh my goodness. There's so many tangents I went on today. I can't believe it. But if you're still with me, thank you. For those people that came in and dropped out, thank you as well. But that gets us to the end of the text, which mainly focuses in on, again, faith and trusting in God to be able to take care of us, as similarly we saw in Lamentations, and even as we see in our time of affliction, to be able to give charitably and take care of one another. And so Jesus shows that giving to take care of those that come to him. Even the woman of blood that should have made him unclean but didn't. So thank you very much for joining us for another Sunday follow-up. Again, I'll upload this on YouTube now. We do this on Sunday afternoons live on Kick, where you could get in the chat and ask me questions. I noticed that I had a plethora of not questions today, but that's usual. And I will answer those live. Otherwise, leave a comment below and tell me all your questions, if you have any. If you don't have any questions, don't leave any comments. I don't care. I do this mainly for me. Have a blessed week and enjoy your 4th of July.